Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you all to the third lecture in the Triology seminar series on the futures of integration of human knowledge and civilizational development. The theme of these three lectures given by Professor Abdullah Hassan has been civilizational sustainability and challenges for education, divine guidance, all through history. Just to wrap up and what has gone in the past. In the beginning, in the first lecture, Dr. Abdullah Hassan spoke about the curriculum and the worldviews which are taught in the universities and to the younger generation. In the second lecture, which was very interesting, he talked about the presence of supreme being in every civilizational history of every civilization, rather in the creation stories, in the myths of every creation. And today's lecture is focusing on Islam, Islamism, and Islamophobia, a survey of the relationship between Islamic and Western civilizations today. Once again, I need to introduce Professor Abdullah Hassan. For those who have not joined earlier, the previous two lectures are already available on YouTube channel of ISTAC-IIUM YouTube. Professor Abdullah Hassan is Professor of Comparative Civilization in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Istanbul Shahar University, formerly. Earlier, he served for 30 years at the International Islamic University, Malaysia. He graduated from McGill University, Montreal, Canada, and he did his PhD from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, United States. He has contributed many articles and on the relationship between contemporary Islamic and Western civilizations. As I mentioned before, and I mention it again, that his first book was on the Organization of Islamic Conference, OIC, which is a very important work. The first work on that topic. It was published in 1988 by IIIT. And then the second publication was Ummah or Nation, Identity Crisis in Contemporary Muslim Society. It is published from Islamic Foundation in Leicester, in UK. The third publication he edited along with Stephen Young, titled Guidance for Good Governance, Explorations in Quranic, Scientific, and Cross-Cultural Approaches, which was published by the International Islamic University, Malaysia, in two editions, 2008 and 2013. His latest work is on Quranic Guidance for Good Governance, a Contemporary Perspective, published in 2017 from Palgrave Macmillan, and his articles and books have been translated into many languages, into Arabic, Bengali, Bosnian, Turkish, and Urdu. So our topic for today is Islam, Islamism, and Islamophobia, a survey of the relationship between Islamic and Western civilizations today. Professor Abdullah Hassan, please. Thank you.
Thank you, brother Dr. Imtiaz. Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu as-salam ala Rasulihil Karim. I thank again ISTAC administration and the big dean and Dr. Imtiaz for inviting me. That invitation gave me the opportunity to summarize my current objective. And my current objective is to convey to the younger generation the worldview that I feel should be conveyed to the younger generation in terms of their intellectual growth. And my interest is a course, 2-semester course, surveying of world civilizations, and demonstrate through that course that God not only exists, He cares for humanity, He has guided throughout history, and Islam is the latest guidance which we have today in our hands in the form of the Quran, and also we have historical evidence of the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who has, according to Muslim faith, has implemented that faith into practice. So, in the first lecture, I tried to, what is this? In first lecture, I tried to explain how we view the beginning of history. And in the beginning of history, do we see any intervention of God in history? And I have tried to explain that view by citing an article by Immanuel Kant, the Enlightenment philosopher of Europe, about the beginning of history, which is very rational. And I have explained that rationalism is the only method which is common in, particularly in the context of the relationship between Islamic and Western civilization. And therefore, we want to argue rationally and find out how we identify divine messages throughout history. And that is what we did in our second lecture. Today, I want to undertake discussion on this topic, that Islam, Islamism, and Islamophobia, a survey of relationship between Islamic and Western civilizations today. In other words, I want to look forward and I want to find out how that guidance that we have mentioned in the form of Quran and the life of the Prophet ﷺ, how we can bring those ideas into practice in the today's context. So these are vast topics for discussion, of course, yet I think we have to have the mechanism and methodology to convey our messages, the constraints that we have within those constraints. So please bear with me that if you think that I am escaping too much, just note it down. Where do you tap to? Oh, here. Oh, no. So this is what we are going to do today. Now, what is Islam? And I told you last time that I have tried to take from ChatGPT, because ChatGPT has the ability to summarize existing literature that are available in of course, online, but most of the online, books also are available online. So ChatGPT has the ability to survey, look at all the available literature and summarize them. So briefly, you can read it. I don't have to explain this. I'm sure you are all familiar with this. But the last point that I make here, model system of governance based on reliable sources by modern standards. So this is how we want to examine. This is how we want to examine our historical developments. Now, idea of Islamism, I think we should explain. And Islamism, as is identified, and I agree with that definition, that it is political ideology that seeks to promote the application of Islamic principles and values in all aspects of society, including government, law, and social and economic systems in the modern context. So what we are doing here is taking the developments, particularly in connection with the relationship between Islamic and Western civilizations, which I am devoting here only from the 19th and 20th century. Of course, one can say that relationship between Islamic and Western civilization is very old. In the 7th century, Islam was spread in Spain, and Muslim rule existed for 800 years. That part, of course, we are not taking into consideration. Also, in the context of the modern times, also you can say until 1857, Muslims have fought all over the world against European colonialism. We are not also taking that into consideration. We are only concentrating from the middle of the 19th century, when you can clearly see that Muslim intellectuals were interested in learning from the West. And the idea of modernism became kind of a phenomena that many scholars have produced work on. So we will just point out to these developments. So Islamism, I would say that it started from there, but it became even more serious after the independence of most Muslim nation states in the middle of the 20th century. And when Muslim nation states, until they were independent under colonial administrations, you could not expect Muslim countries to practice Islamic ideas. And therefore, we identify Islamism after the creation of Muslim nation states. Here again, there is a very important point that we must not ignore, and that is the situation in Turkey. Turkey, as Erdogan would like us to mention, even in English, encountered Western ideas particularly since the French Revolution. By the French Revolution, Turkish scholars started to recognize the superiority of Western thought, and they developed the ideas of learning from the West. And later you will see that those who were influenced by the ideas of Sayyid Maududi and Hassan al-Banna, they challenged those ideas of modernism and nationalism. So those are Islamism here is as opposed to the nationalist developments, nationalism, and Islamism wanted to have Islamic law as the primary source of legislation and governance. And they also advocate the establishment of Islamic State, or at least Islamic values in governance. I bring the idea of Islamophobia as well, mainly because many people are now suggesting that the relationship between Western civilization and Islamic civilization have taken a turn of kind of fear that has been created by certain intellectuals. And Islamophobia is, widely discussed today. So we undertake that discussion as well. Now, what is the relationship between the Muslim world and the clash of civilizations? I'm taking again, in order to make our discussion, focus our discussion, I am taking only from this development, clash of civilizations. You know that Clash of Civilizations thesis was produced in 1990. And what was the international scenario? 1989-90, that was the time when former Soviet Union collapsed. As a result of that, the bipolar system that was created after the Second World War, and many Muslim nation states started to follow that bipolar world, that changed significantly. And when this changed, Cold War ended. Bernard Lewis, a very famous British historian, came forward with this idea of clash of civilizations. He wrote an article. In that article, he introduced the idea of clash of civilizations. And what this thesis did was that it brought Muslim countries or the Muslim world into the focal point, into the mainstream political development, as it was before in the periphery of political developments, because Muslim countries were not powerful. Now here, this is what Bernard Lewis did in 1990. He wrote an article, Roots of Muslim Rage. Now imagine, he is writing, and title of his article is Roots of Muslim Rage. If you look at his, in fact, I wrote an article which was published in Middle East Monitor after he died in 2018. And in that article, I have demonstrated how he changed his writing orientation, and he concentrated on clash of civilizations. And I think it is relevant that I make a little bit of reference to his own background. He was a Jewish, born in London, 1916, and during his go, just before the Second World War, he joined the British School of Oriental Studies and also joined the Foreign Ministry for translation. And that is where he started to study Arabic and Islamic studies. And in the process, he wrote his PhD dissertation on Ismailism. My understanding is that he chose Ismailism because Ismailism was, of course, a kind of threat to mainstream Muslim developments because of their role in history. Ismailism, I mean, if you look at, you will find their growth in Egypt, founded the famous Al-Azhar University in the 10th century, but scholarship was oriented toward deviating from the mainstream Muslim scholarship. And perhaps he tried to identify weak points of Muslim history. But what is interesting is that after writing his PhD thesis, he realized that pointing out to those kind of differences will not work, and therefore he devoted his studies on Turkey. Now, Turkey was important because Turkey was emerging as a model Muslim state, and Turkey adopted a policy which many scholars have identified as not as modernization, but as westernization. He would like to, I mean, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk would like to copy even how to sit in a dining table, how to pray in a mosque. He would put table and chair inside the mosque, call azan in Turkish, all those. He thought that perhaps this is the future that Muslim world is going to have. In fact, he made a comment in his book. I mean, he wrote a number of books, but most famous book during this time that he wrote was Emergence of Modern Turkey. And there he pointed out that the struggle that Muslims had in the beginning when Prophet was engaged in the Islamic invitation for Islamic message, the Prophet was struggling against Allah, Al-Uzza, those idols that existed in the Makkah, in Kaaba. And he says that Prophet was able to defeat those idols, but Muslim community is going through another struggle, similar struggle. This time, idols are ideas like nationalism and racism and westernization. And he says that this time, it seems to me that idols are winning. He made a prediction. That was 1963-64. But what happened in 1973 was that some Arab leaders were able to recapture the Suez Canal. In 1973, Egyptian army was able to cross the canal and occupy some territories, and that changed the scenario. And that 73 was followed by 1974 oil embargo. As a result of that, Muslim countries started to gain some importance. And Bernard Lewis wrote in 1976 an article. Title of the article is Return of Islam. If you Google, you will easily find it. Return of Islam. In other words, the kind of prediction that he made about a little bit more than a decade ago, he revised it. And I feel strongly that he was looking for opportunity to attack Islamic teachings, and that opportunity came after the collapse of Soviet Union in 1990. And he wrote this article. And he says in the article, I quote, "It should now be clear that we are facing a mood and a movement far transcending the level of issues and policies and the governments that pursue them. This is no less than a clash of civilizations. The perhaps irrational, but surely historical reaction, an ancient rival against our Judeo-Christian heritage, our secular present and worldwide expansion of both. It is crucially important that we, on our side, should not be provoked into an equally historic but also equally irrational reaction against that rival. So he identified the enemy. Here comes Huntington. Huntington, a political scientist at Harvard, undertook this same idea, and when he wrote his article in 1993 in the Foreign Affairs, he said that he was writing to guide the Foreign Office because you need an enemy to determine your existence. And therefore, Soviet Union has collapsed, enemy is gone, you need a new enemy. And new enemy was created in the form of Chinese civilization and Islamic civilization. But what is interesting is that although he mentions Chinese and Islamic civilization as opposed to Islamic civilization, as opposed to Western civilization, almost more than 80% of the book is devoted to study of Islamic civilization, not Chinese civilization. It's just peripheral mention about China. And he also tried in his article to suggest that they have a Judeo-Christian heritage, meaning that Western civilization has inherited Judeo-Christian tradition. This is also a very problematic idea because until the execution of Jews in Germany, this term Judeo-Christian tradition was not popular in Western literature. In fact, Nietzsche, when he used the term Judeo-Christian tradition in the 19th century, Nietzsche pointed out that this is a negative term for Western civilization. But you will see that until this event of execution of Jews in Germany, the literature, European literature, was not very favorable to the Jews. If you read very simple example of Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice, you know the character of Shylock, and as opposed to Antonio and Bassanio. You can clearly see Shakespeare's attitude toward the Jews in that drama. The point I'm making is that Bernard Lewis pointed out that we belong to the same group. And therefore, when you determine your policy, you must identify yourself as one group and enemy as another group. We and their relationship. So he argued in the article that Muslims are convinced of the superiority of their culture, but obsessed with the inferiority of their power. Okay? And then, of course, after 9/11, he wrote a number of books and articles. The clash between Islam and modernity in the Middle East, roots of modern Muslim rage, the crisis of Islam, holy war and unholy terror, Muslims about to take over Europe. Books and articles he wrote continuously since 9/11. And you can clearly see emergence of the thesis and the event of 9/11. I don't know who did it, but I can clearly see the similarity of action. One is intellectual, another is practical terrorism. And to my understanding, both belong to the same category. Then Huntington argued that there can be no true friends without true enemies. Unless we hate what we are not, we cannot love what we are. These are old truths we are painfully rediscovering. Those who deny them deny their family, their heritage, their culture, their birthright, their very selves. They will not lightly be forgiven. So exactly this is what you see, the kind of ideas nationalism was proposing in the 19th century, in 19th century Europe, and he is copying similar ideas in the context of civilization, no more nationalism. So enemies are essential for people seeking identity. He took Bernard Lewis' idea. And then this 1970s was identified by Huntington. And he says in his book, I quote, beginning in the 1970s, Islamic symbols, beliefs, practices, institutions, policies, and organizations won increasing commitment and support throughout the world of 1 billion Muslims stretching from Morocco to Indonesia and from Nigeria to Kazakhstan. In 1995, every country with predominantly Muslim population was more Islamic, more Islamist culturally, socially, and politically than it was 15 years ago. Clearly, this is a reference to the achievements of Sayyid Maududi and Hassan al-Banna. Even in the case of, in the context of Malaysia, you will see that the growth of ABIM as a youth movement and the growth of headscarf, using headscarf. If you look at Malaysian movies of 1960s and Malaysian movies since 70s and 80s, you can clearly see the difference in terms of women's roles. Sorry?
Corruption wasn't that bad.
Corruption was not that bad. Okay.
I agree with that.
So maybe what Dr. Isham is trying to suggest is that with Islamism came corruption. This is what I'm saying.
I mean, you're relating headscarf to Islamic ideals.
Yes.
Yet other Islamic ideals do not seem to follow from the head.
Okay. But anyway, we'll come to this point. You see the kind of scholarship that Huntington promoted, and most scholars all over the world accepted this kind of statistics produced by Huntington. 50% of wars involving pairs of states of different religions between 1820 and 1929 were wars between Muslims and Christians. So he gives statistics, more than 50%. Just imagine 1820 to 1929. What was the period? The period of colonialism. And all these wars, I would say almost 100%, were nationalist wars. Of course, Muslims used Islam to inspire people to fight. And of course, you would also hear ideas like Hubbul Watan min al-Iman. This Watan was integrated with Iman. And most of these wars were between these, pairs of states. Of course, you can identify the colonial states were Christian and most of the colonies were Muslim. But this is a gross misinterpretation of history. And yet, our scholarship accepted such findings. Then came the Iranian Revolution and the Iranian approach toward the United States, not only the United States, but also the whole of Western world, Western civilization, that he found good ground to argue that Iranian Revolution and intercivilizational quasi-war developed between Islam and the West. And then he continues with his argument to highlight the differences between the two civilizations. He says, it is hard to find statements by any Muslims, whether politician, official, academic, business persons, or journalists, praising Western values and institutions. They instead stress the differences between their civilization and Western civilization, the superiority of their culture, and the need to maintain the integrity of that culture against Western onslaught. Muslims fear and resent Western power and the threat which this poses to their society and beliefs. They see Western culture as materialistic, corrupt, decadent, and immoral. Of course, you can clearly see Sayyid Qutb in this statement that he summarizes about the growth of Muslim states. So he argues, Huntington argues, problem for the West is not Islamic fundamentalism. It is Islam, a different civilization. Those people are convinced the superiority of their culture and obsessed with their inferiority in their power. The same idea which Bernard Lewis said in 1990, he brings it in 1996 in his book. But if you study carefully, and here I'm quoting from Oxford History of India, that British plunder of wealth after occupation of Muslim Bengal in 1757, one British historian noted that men made fortunes, returned to England, lost them, and returned to India for more. This was the situation in the later half of the 18th century. In fact, again, it's very difficult to avoid some of the developments here. Hans Kohn, most quoted historian of nationalism in Muslim countries, Hans Kohn says this, that poverty existed everywhere, in the West as well as in the East. West was lucky enough to discover capitalism, and that is how they became powerful. But fact is that Muslim countries were much more richer than European countries before 18th century. That is what I'm trying to highlight here. And after 9/11, this is what President Bush declared. There was no room for neutrality in the war against terrorism. And you are either with us or against us. There is no need to discuss innocence or guilt. We know he is guilty, referring to Osama bin Laden. So this is how a war was imposed on the Muslim world. And of course, you cannot ignore these developments when you talk about the relationship between Islamic and Western civilizations. And of course, there were efforts. I mean, I was mentioning this yesterday also in a talk, that when Taliban destroyed the statues, Buddhist statues in the Afghanistan mountains, there were efforts to prevent it. But somehow, some people were able to convince some Taliban leaders to destroy it without giving much scope for discussion on the subject. I mean, statues that existed for 1400 years, all of a sudden those statues became a barrier to Islamic idea, Islamic model, Islamic state, whatever it is. Does not make sense. But anyway, the efforts were neglected. No chance was given for any discussion. Then this is how Bush brought those arguments into the into policies. That attack took place in American soil, but it was an attack on the heart and soul of the civilized world. Here, the word civilized is important. That as if those who do not follow Western model are not civilized. And the world has come together to fight a new and different war. The first, and we hope, and only one in the 21st century. A war against all those who seek to export terror, and a war against those governments that support or shelter them. So clearly, of course, he was addressing some Muslim leaders. Either you are either with us or against us. And I was discussing this the other day, that British education policy in India produced Brown Sahib. I don't know whether you're familiar with Brown Sahib. Sahib means Englishman in the Indian literature. And brown, of course, you know that non-white. So, in other words, the policy, I think I have mentioned this last time, Lord Macaulay, who produced the education policy, he defined the education policy as a policy which will produce a class of Indians who will be Indian in blood and color, but English in taste. If you look at the Muslim leaders who became leaders in independent Muslim nations in the 50s, most of them belong to that group. So Pakistan was extremely worried that Bush had threatened that he will push Pakistan into Stone Age. The Stone Age, I mean, you will see many of the speech of Imran Khan has been highlighting this point, how Pakistan destroyed itself by supporting United States in 2001. But then most dangerous was the war on Iraq. It has been established in the Western press that it was totally false allegation, weapon of mass destruction. But if you look back, intellectual activities of Bernard Lewis, you will see that he was a key person to convince the policymakers in Washington that invasion of Iraq was necessary for the Western civilization to survive. So what I would like to suggest is that when you study history, you integrate these developments and try to understand what had happened. So from 1970s, Islamic movements created this kind of optimism. And when I was giving the talk yesterday at IIS on the OIC, this is the point that I was highlighting, that 1970s, when we were in our 20s, we saw a lot of hope for the future. Muslim countries became independent. They were asserting their identities. And there was huge potential. The OIC came into existence. OIC established the Islamic Development Bank. It developed the policy to integrate manpower of Turkey, Egypt, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia into the wealth of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or UAE, so that this integration will make Muslim country richer. These gave the hope to the Muslim youth when we were growing. But unfortunately, perhaps today we don't see that spark of hope among those who are in their 20s today. And that is the point that I would like to highlight here. Now, I think I'm done with this. Now, what I'd like to point out here make it larger. Go down. Oh, I don't, yeah.
Here, I can take this.
Okay, go down. No, not here. Okay, I think I'll do it here. Anyway, I think just stop
this.
Stop screening.
Okay. Stop the screen.
Yeah. It's sharing. Okay. I have not been able to develop slides for this because these discussions are a little bit in detail, very difficult to summarize them in one slide. So that is why I have avoided preparing a slide for that. Here, I would like to highlight some points that how did Islamists respond to these challenges? Challenges that came from the interpretation of the developments. How did Islamic movement, those who were influenced by ideas of Sayyid Maududi and Hassan al-Banna, how they responded? One response was Islamization of knowledge. And you know that this university, our International Islamic University, also was established along those lines. And the idea was that we address the situation from an intellectual perspective, and we try to address our curriculum by writing books, convincing the younger generation that Islam has the ability to counter this knowledge. And knowledge is, I was having a discussion with Professor Nakibullah Atas last night, and I went to see him, and he was pointing out to this, that knowledge was corrupted, and he was one of the pioneers, including him and other figures in this Islamization of knowledge. And he was saying that he was trying to point out how Western civilization, Western knowledge was corrupted. This corruption, I tried to highlight in my previous 2 lectures, how we see the beginning of human history, how we read the impact of divine knowledge in various civilizations in history, and how since 19th century, different subjects like, Professor Attas was mentioning anthropology, but it is not only anthropology, sociology, political science, economics, law, all subjects are rooted in this corruption of knowledge. And the corruption, of course, was taking Hobbesian view of man in nature as the foundation for the theory of justice. And Fukuyama, I have pointed out this point earlier, that Fukuyama also highlights that this is a faulty beginning, faulty space to identify the theory of justice. And this movement, of course, in my talk in the main campus, I pointed out that Islamization of knowledge was confined only to Muslims. It has not been able to go beyond the Muslim community. When you look at the problems today of the youth, you will agree with me that the problem that Muslim youth encounter today, same problem also encountered by Christians or Jews or atheists or Buddhists or any other religion. This is a common problem for every religious tradition. And therefore, my understanding is that we should go beyond the Muslim community. And that is how I evaluate Islamization of knowledge movement. Then we have, if you look at contemporary Muslim world, you see that 1990s, Malaysia demonstrated very good example of development. You keep your Muslim identity, but you also make material progress. But that did not last too long. In the beginning of the century and later, as Brother Hisham has mentioned, that corruption also came along with these developments. And that corruption destroyed the hope that was created in the 1990s. Dr. Hisham, I'm sure that he has experienced himself that what kind of hope he had in his 20s and what kind of hope he has today, and how much hope his children have about the future. And that is my main concern. Also,
it's an interesting remark that you made that the corruption should be solved by all religions, not just by one. Therefore, the solution is not uniquely Islamic.
That's right. Yeah, that is what I'm saying, that corruption problem is not only
not corruption, but the corruption of knowledge that you were talking about just now.
Yeah.
Distortion. Distortion of knowledge.
No, Professor Attas uses the word corruption. Yes.
Okay. So the solution is not uniquely Islamic.
Well, we can come to that point. We can discuss that. But point I'm making here is that the Islamization movement, to my understanding, did not achieve the goal that it started with the objective that it had. Then, in the beginning of this century, 2002, in Turkey, AK party came with a lot of hope. And the first decade, Turkey was really able to do a very good job. You will see a YouTube interview of, this American Muslim scholar, Zaytuna Institute, Hamza Yusuf. Hamza Yusuf makes this point very clearly, that Turkey was able not only to repay all the loans that Turkey took from IMF and World Bank, it became a donor country within 1 decade, in front of us. And that is the progress that Turkey made in 1 decade. And I would give the credit to the Islamic movements. But unfortunately, that has been destroyed. Turkey has, I don't have to go into detail of that, but I'm saying what I'm saying is that that hope does not exist anymore. Look at the Turkish youth today. They would like to go out of Turkey. Although first decade they were coming back. Those who had gone back, they were coming back to Turkey. But then they were going out after 2014, 2015, 2016, around that time, they started to get out of the country. Then Obama's Cairo speech, very famous speech. He influenced, provoked Muslim youth, and Muslim youth responded very positively. Arab revolutions occurred. But what has happened? Muslim Brotherhood came to power. A very faulty understanding of democracy. You get 51% vote and you think that you will make the whole change. Don't compare this 51% vote with Prophet's liberation of Makkah. Prophet could declare that anyone who goes to Abu Sufyan's house also is safe. In other words, he did not have the fear that people will gather in Abu Sufyan's house and fight against us. He knew that the whole population had already accepted the message. But by getting 51%, we think that we'll bring the revolution. So when we know already that the whole administration, including not only the, politicians and engineers, the military, the doctors, but even the sweepers were from the previous government. They did not have the commitment that the new government Egypt needed. But unfortunately, you know that the government could not survive more than a year. And also, if you look at development since then, I just want to summarize and finish my talk with some references to these countries. Turkey, look at what is happening in Pakistan. And Imran Khan, after he lost his power as prime minister, he became even more clearer. Before, when he was still prime minister, he was blaming America, that America conspired against his prime ministership. Regime change idea came from America. But after he lost the power, he realized that no, America was invited by Pakistanis. Pakistanis went through, this is so unfortunate, a person who was groomed by Islamic Jamiat Talaba, who became Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, this person acted as a mediator between the Pakistani establishment and American administration.
What is his name?
Well, you Google it, you will find. So this is how Muslim countries have responded Western challenges. Now, and I have some interesting, when I was writing this, I looked at some of the material, relevant material, which I think I will use when I write on this. The manipulation of information, false information. There is a very good article in Middle East Eye. I would strongly recommend all of you to read regularly Middle East Eye. Osborne, Peter Osborne, one of the editors of Middle East Eye, he wrote this article, Trojan Horse. When facts are contested, who decides the truth? So this is something interesting. Many people argue that they are promoting the truth. The same idea, same challenge, Socrates also had. The sophists used to claim that they were promoting the truth. And it is in this context that Socrates developed his own methodology by how to find the truth through self-examination. So this article highlights some of these challenges that the Muslim countries are having. And this is related to a school curriculum in Birmingham City in London, in England. And in Birmingham City, a school which has, I think, more than 70% students Muslim, yet in that school, some curriculum, there was some disagreement about some items in the curriculum. And these people who promote Clash of Civilizations thesis, they concocted some of the facts to divert the attention that those who are running the school administration, they all come from this Islamic movement background, and therefore that must be closed down. That kind of argument has been made. In other words, what I'm trying to suggest is that the field of study should be widened. It is not just history, it is communication, it is sociology, it is political science, it is economics. In all disciplines, what you need is to apply critical thinking. And I have pointed it out that although even Cambridge University has a discipline called critical thinking, they have subject of teaching critical thinking. To my understanding, critical thinking cannot be a subject. Critical thinking is a methodology which should be applied in every subject. And therefore, you don't need another 3 credit hour for critical thinking. You apply your sociology, your anthropology through critical thinking, challenging the question of foundation. Then you will find. So the point I'm trying to make to the youth today is that develop this methodology of critical thinking. Critical thinking will apply not only to the Western thinkers, it will also apply to your parents, your teachers who have Muslim names. Challenge them from your understanding, and then you will see that you will be able to find the truth. So with this, I think I'll stop here. Open the floor for discussion, but if I have, I'm sure I was trying to bring many ideas into this 1 hour presentation. I'm sure there are a lot of gaps. Please feel free to raise questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Abdul Hassan. You have raised, as you said, many questions, and you took us through the history of the hope and the despair in which we are. The despair is that the project, if I can summarize here, is that the Islamization of knowledge project, which was the hope, has totally failed. And this is
I didn't say totally.
that's my word. That's my word.
Because you are involved in Islamization of knowledge movement.
Yeah.
I'm not as involved.
Yeah. Okay. So it's my word. It has failed to deliver. I don't say it has failed. It has failed to deliver the hope of when we were young, and we had hoped that Southeast Asia. There was a whole issue of Time magazine, on that Islam in Southeast Asia, right here in Indonesia, Malaysia, would be the future of Islam. Even Fazlur Rahman in his book Islam and Modernity says the same thing. But all fizzled out. And now you are saying that what is needed is revival of critical thinking. And this is a cultural problem for us, because our students don't ask these questions or question the authority, and unless and until we don't develop critical thinking from within and without, we will not be able to reach the goal of Islamic revival or Islamic revivalism. I'm using my word again. And there are many forces. Now the forces are within us, and it is very clear, as you mentioned, what is happening in Pakistan, what is happening in Turkey, what is happening in even in this country, that there are the enemy is within, not far. Yes, the Allah issue is back in. It is no more the far enemy of Georges Fawaz. So with this, I open up for the floor. If you have questions, comments to make, Dr. Isham, Professor Isham, you would like to? Yes.
Okay, I have been listening all the 3 lectures, some face-to-face and something desperate, hopelessness, to me is haram. Your hopelessness or desperate, to me is haram. We shouldn't be desperate and we shouldn't be hopeless. Forget about that hopelessness. Yes, there are always success and failures, and enemies among ourselves is nothing new. Even Prophet time, there were the enemies. Huge plan of the Prophet was leaked through the lady. But Prophet is Prophet because he got revelations and he got alert. So they managed to solve the problem through that. But of course, we are not Prophet and we don't have the leaders who are receiving the revelations. What is problem is actually, from the business school point of view, let me give you one idea. In this 1970s oil crisis, like you mentioned also Suez Canal and OIC and all those things, there are many competitors and many oil producing companies. They are all following the same path of forecasting and using the quantitative methods and trying to come up with the plan. All of them, they collapse because the crisis hit them, all their planning and business fails. It was only Shell. They have a different tool, which is called scenario planning. And that scenario planning, when one scenario changes, they have the plan B. They move to it. And that made the Shell until today the leader in oil and gas industry. So the capability, unfortunately, we Muslims, intellectuals, we have to accept the fact. I go back to our Hisham's, we are human. So we have to accept these facts, but we have to develop our own tools, and we must be always accepting the fact that espionage, betrayal, and this all human nature, it will remain part of the business. So we shouldn't lose the hope. That's my first take, number one. Number two, of course, not we. Always we talk about the war and what you call fighting and then strategies. There are a bigger part of Islam elsewhere also. So why should we get carried away with the provocations coming from the Western civilization all the time, trying to, I still remember I was in Islamabad. There is an exchange program between Beijing and Islamabad Research Institute. So they exchange the professors. The one in one of the big events, I was with the IIU delegates. The professor who was speaking from Beijing, he said, China, we are different. We will not tell you you are either with us or you are against us. We will always be with you. And now you can see the China and Pakistan friendship doesn't matter who is the leader, change of hands and gods happens, but they are there. So is a Western mindset. So, and the Eastern values are different. So, I mean, we shouldn't give the hope. And even Islamization, maybe sociology, anthropology, social sciences didn't happen. But I'm proud to say in Islamic economics happened. We achieve Islamic banking, Islamic finance, and etc. There are challenges, no doubt. So there are some success. It's not totally failure when it comes to Islamization of the knowledge. Theoretically, there is always a problem, but we show the practical examples and it will happen eventually. Thank you very much. Brother Isham, back to you.
80 days or 80 minutes, but I think you give too much credence to a few intellectuals as if people really care what they say. I don't really think so. Now, as far as the Islamic movement, you even pay too much attention maybe whether Sayyid Qutb was really influential or not. I really don't think so. Even Maududi, I really don't think his influence is that great even today. I mean, among certain people, yes, but general, no. This idea of, Muslim success is based on how many hijabs people wear these days is a bad method to do it. I mean, when the Syrian refugees were running away, they were not going to Mecca. They were going to Germany. And those were the only people willing to accept them. So how do we explain this? Supposedly, with more and more people becoming more Islamic, it did not show. And in the Malaysian context, there's always this flare-up over and over again over the most trivial of issues. Even Anwar has to back off and start to say, oh, only in Sarawak, nowhere else. I know he doesn't believe that. But what do you do? Your idea that the Muslim Brotherhood really achieved something, maybe in the initial stage, but when they got into power, they became corrupt. They could not, they excluded as many people as they were excluded before. So how do you do this? Instead of living up to their ideals, well, look at Morsi in Egypt, where before he would criticize the government. Now suddenly when he became government, he can't be criticized. And he could not include people who actually brought him into power. So how are we like this? Are we going to always be like this, our way or no way? And therefore the credence that Muslims, Muslim organizations only won election once, and once they win, elections disappear. Yeah. Is that going to be the case? So how do you have these reforms? I think external threats are actually very minor, frankly speaking. I think when Bush is saying all these things, Muslims were already fighting among themselves. No Muslim countries, or I see being the case, were even united at all. So how do you adjust to today's times?
Actually, I'm not sure whether I agree with this view that Islamic economics has succeeded.
That's another one. Poor are still very poor.
Yeah. Not only that, even the method that many people would say that You have just changed the terminology,
Right.
but the mechanism has been the same. So that takes me back to Muhammad Abdu's opinion about banking system. And many of our, if you differentiate between modernist and fundamentalist, I don't want to use those terms, but you know that what I'm referring to. And many of those who feel that they are reviving the Islamic tradition, they would criticize Muhammad Abdu on this point. I disagree with that view. I think Muhammad Abdu was sincere, and many of these modernists were sincere. They were trying to adjust with the challenges. And if freedom were given with transparency, then I think things would have succeeded. Even in this movement of Islamic economics, I strongly feel that perhaps we lack proper transparency. And as long as transparency will not be, completely clear, and at the same time, we take accountability very seriously, then I think system will succeed. System needs to reevaluate itself based on this. And of course, human dignity. If a poor person takes loan, we must extract that loan from that poor person. If a wealthy, I remember a friend of mine from Nigeria, that was many years ago. He was telling me that Nigeria, there was a strong demand that Sharia must be implemented. And some states on their own, they implemented. And of course, as a result of that, many thieves were caught. And who did they steal? Maybe bicycle, maybe a goat, maybe when the chopping of hand could not have been implemented without the signature of the governor. Now, many governors were very sincere Muslim. So what they do is that they will not sign because they know the politicians are corrupting, stealing millions. And what is the use of punishing this thief who has stolen a bicycle? They don't sign. As a result, at least decades, people were spending inside the jail. So this is the kind of situation we created in the name of Sharia. I'm talking about Nigeria here. So this is not, other countries are not very different. In Pakistan, you go in the name of blasphemy. Lynching has become so common, they have no shame of doing this kind of stuff. So the point I'm trying to make is that you are right, that external threats are not major threat. Understand this. It is our own problem. And if you can fix that, you will see that external forces will agree, that they will see that this is something that we should adopt. How many Westerners are accepting Islam? Look at Jeffrey Lang. Jeffrey Lang, a mathematician, mathematics professor, became Muslim and says that if I had met some Muslims before I converted to Islam, I would not have become a Muslim. Jeffrey Lang, go and see his YouTube.
Yeah.
So this is our situation. So why do you criticize others? Thank you.
There are a few questions on the Zoom. Just missed it. The first question is from Brother Khalid Noor. He's talking about Tabligh Jamaat. He has got two questions. Why do we underplay the role of Tabligh Jamaat in promoting Islamic adherence in Malaysia? This is the first question.
This is not for me to answer this question.
All right. Second question is, why do we underplay the role of Tabligh Jamaat Maulana Shabir Usmani, who also was important in laying the foundations of Islamic polity in creation of Pakistan? So why do we not acknowledge that the role of Tabligh Jamaat in the formation of Pakistan?
I'm not sure.
Sir, I didn't say anything about the Tablighi Jamaat in the formation of Pakistan. Not at all.
Say it again.
I said I never mentioned about the role of Tablighi Jamaat in the formation of Pakistan. My
Yeah.
question is very clear. Just read it out.
Shabir Ahmad Usmani played a significant role in the passage of the Objectives Resolution 1949, which firmly based the Constitution of Pakistan on Quran and Sunnah. This is what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah. This is not
It
about
was not the Tablighi Jamaat.
Yeah, you're right. It is not about Tablighi Jamaat.
Okay.
Yeah. It is about,
Shabir
you
Ahmad.
can say Sayyid Maududi,
Shabir
you can say
Usmani.
Shabir Ahmad Usmani. Shabir Ahmad Usmani, of course, was a leading figure among ulama who supported Pakistan. But on this objective resolution, most prominent role was played by Zafar Ahmad Ansari, Maulana Zafar Ansari, father of Zafar Ishaq Ansari, and also Sayyid Maududi. And Zafar Ahmad Ansari was the Secretary General of that movement, objective resolution. You see, personally, I am convinced that objective resolution was a very good ground that was prepared in 1949. We are going to very specifics. I hope others do not get, and I'll try to finish as fast as I can. This resolution, 1949 objective resolution, it was adopted at a time when Pakistan still had a Hindu law minister. Jogindranath Mandal was the law minister of Pakistan, appointed by Jinnah. He was still the law minister, and he agreed with objective resolution. He was convinced that if objective resolution were followed, minorities will be safe. The statement that Jinnah made on 11th of August 1947 in the Constituent Assembly, assuring everybody that justice will be done to everybody, that was along the same lines. But of course, that statement of Jinnah of 11th of August has been disputed even by Sayyid Maududi, but I strongly feel that it was adjusted very well in the objective resolution. Based on that, 1956 Constitution came, and Sayyid Maududi said, Shukr hai, kaum ne kalma parli. Thank God, the nation has witnessed, has accepted the Shahada. And therefore, nation will go toward, correct, right direction. And what happened to this constitution? It did not last 2 years. The bureaucrats and the military suppressed it. And it's a different discussion. The point I'm making is that Jogindranath Mandal had left already, but Justice Cornelius, a Catholic who became Chief Justice of Supreme Court of Pakistan, was a strong supporter of this constitution. And there are good literature on this. Read it, you'll see. But again, don't blame others. Who destroyed the constitution? Not only Ayub Khan, the most responsible was Justice Munir. You see, a Bengali was supposed to inherit the position of Supreme Court of Pakistan. Second person who was supposed to be the second Chief Justice of Pakistan was a Bengali. But he was denied the position. Justice Munir was brought, and he justified the military rule. So this is how Pakistan has gone through. Thank you.
Hisham has provoked again the name of Allah again, and you are writing very extensively. I can see daily appearing into.
Can we focus here, please? Because there's some questions on the online. There's a question here. Okay, I'm missing this. Professor, would you agree that Huntington's clash thesis has parallels with Muslim thinkers like Naqib al-Attas, who also posit irreconcilable clash of worldviews between Islamic and the Western secularist worldview?
That is a very problematic question for me to answer, because I have not done that kind of deep studies, but I can see that not only Professor Naqbil, but also many other Muslim leaders, particularly if you look at the statements of leaders of Jamaat Islami in Pakistan, enmity against West is so strong. But I have been involved in interfaith dialogue. I have communicated with many Westerners. And it is in the 90s also, when I was teaching here in the main campus history courses, I always used to compare Egyptian President Mubarak and South African President Mandela. Who will you choose between the two? And I also used to take back to Abu Sufyan and Abu Talib. And I strongly feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a logic why Abu Talib did not publicly declare Shahada. Allah wants you to look at it. And don't give a fatwa that such and such died as a non-Muslim is going to Jahannam. This is not your job to decide. Let Allah decide who goes to Jannah and who goes to. Do your job. So this is our problem, that we want to ensure that this person must go to Jannah because he has faith La ilaha illallah.
Can you elaborate again on the question, on the what you talked about, corruption of knowledge, as you discussed with Naqib?
Corruption of knowledge, I tried to highlight when I was giving my second talk. In the second talk, I mentioned that we discuss the true religion, the understanding of what we understand as God's power, or God's guidance, divine guidance. But I have quoted some books like Karen Armstrong. Many people read her as one of the best sources on religion. But Karen Armstrong clearly says that her book is about man's discovery of God, man's identification of God, not God's, man creating God, not God creating man. And it makes a big difference. And the literature of sociology, anthropology, and psychology, all are based on an understanding of religion from the practices of followers. You cannot understand Islam from the behavior of Muslims. If you cannot understand that, how can you understand behavior, Hinduism from the behavior of a Hindu? So this is the problem of our literature. This is corruption of knowledge. I hope it's clear.
Yeah, thank you. To the floor, Amreen, yes, questions. Now I open it up for the floor here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Professor, how far you see that Islam as a political ideology, Islamism can serve our purpose? Do you think that Islam also need reformation? And do you think that we need to bring rationality back? And we youth, when we see that how those scholars who try to use even rationality in interpreting revelation were treated like, for example, Fazl Rahman, how he was like banned from Pakistan and he have to move. So these kind of things, like we youth definitely need to think more creatively, critically, but and we also need to criticize our pioneers because they definitely had a very good vision, very they had a concern for Islam and Muslims, but I think that they tried to present a very utopian future for Muslims that were not realistic in some sense. So when that utopian future couldn't be realized, then there is more hopelessness in us. And I would also argue that Islamic economics did not really fulfill its vision of its pioneers, and also the two extremes young scholars of Islamic economics are hanging between two extremes. Like one is IOK and one is like the thesis of Ziauddin Sardar is that it should be non-modification. We should address the foundations of the course and develop our own theories, whereas IOK takes the theories from the West, try to judge them on Islamic criteria and try to modify them. So how, if you can advise us, like how we reconcile between these two extremes?
I am not sure whether I know enough about these extremes to comment. My approach to knowledge is that I will not go for any course on Islamization of knowledge. I will go for a regular history course or a sociology course and apply critical thinking in every aspect of that specific issue that I am handling. I think it will be automatically Islamization of knowledge. You don't have to claim that it is Islamized knowledge. It will be automatically, and people will understand. I mean, Quran emphasizes this point so much. In kuntum taqilun, afala taqilun, afala yatatabbarun al-Qur'ana. Even on the Quran, you have to tadabbur. How much of it do we do? And I mean, I have an experience when I was doing my master's. I was writing on Sayyid Amir Ali, a modernist, Muslim modernist of the 19th century. My advisor was a very famous Orientalist. When I submitted my first draft, he thought that I was not doing a good job. I should either support Cantwell Smith, who thought Amir Ali was an apologist, or I should follow Maryam Jamila, who thought that Amir Ali was a kafir. I was not willing to do any of those. As a result of that, I could not pursue my PhD in that university. I had to leave. So this is not a problem only with the Muslims. It is a problem with famous Orientalists also. You can challenge the Quran, but you cannot challenge the opinion of your teacher, of your supervisor. This problem exists not only in the Western world, it exists in the Muslim world as well. And therefore, again, I mean, so the point, I don't know whether I have clearly suggested what you wanted me to say, but I mean, generally speaking, I will go with this idea of critical thinking. But of course, critical thinking, I mean, today, one of the challenges that we encounter is gay rights, sex education in schools. The way it is being implemented in American schools, it has become a big challenge for Muslim parents in America. Now, simply from civilizational values, you cannot agree same-sex marriage. This is, of course, revealed knowledge will tell you different stories, but critical thinking will tell you that procreation is essential for the continuity of human civilization, and therefore it cannot be accepted. Have we come up with categorical opinion about it? for our younger generation? We failed, of course. But at the same time, we have to have the intellectual foundation for it. And I think it is not difficult to find the intellectual foundation.
Yeah. Just adding to what Professor Abdullah is saying, Sir Sayyid said there is no contradiction between the word of God and the work of God. And reason confirms revelation confirms reason, and reason confirms revelation. So the other question which comes up here now is to Professor Abdullah is no, this is a comment, so this is not a question. Any other question from here? Yeah, my question is critical thinking is not, the space is not given within our universities, Muslim universities, IIUM, ISTAC, or
There's only one answer, my way or the highway.
my way or the highway.
You see, this
So
is
because there's only the idea that there's only one truth.
no, you will
So
find
how
this.
to reconcile? How
No,
do you reconcile
No,
that
this
with-
this problem exists even at Harvard.
I know.
Harvard professors also are fired.
When we-
Princeton
when we-
fires
we
professors
say
also
that
fired.
Critical thinking
Yeah.
is probably problem.
Yeah.
It's not a unique problem for Muslims.
Oh, okay. So how means the question is, what is the mechanism for critical thinking in our classes, in our pedagogy? How would you encourage it as a historian?
No, again, I have given some examples of critical thinking. When I was talking in my first lecture, the issue of the beginning of human history. And I tried to explain how Immanuel Kant argues in favor of one couple theory. And I feel that if you critically evaluate, you will see that, I mean, Kant is famous for his position on reason. And the way he argues, I think he establishes the point. So therefore, I mean, this kind of methodology, if you use, I don't think that it will be impossible to go to the specifics, then we can get every specific thesis will have this kind of issues. And therefore, I mean, don't think that this opinion, someone was mentioning to me yesterday that he was writing on Maududi and he was quoting Walid al-Nasr about Maududi. You know that Walid al-Nasr has written on Maududi. And apparently his supervisor here has mentioned that Walid al-Nasr is representing the Orientalism, Western view. But this is not good enough to say that. You have to go to the specific. What is the opinion that Maududi said? What is Walid al-Nasr saying? What is the Orientalism here? You have to examine everything. Straightforward rejection of the thesis is not acceptable.
And we get to the game of labeling, especially when they talk about critical thinking, you are immediately labeled as a Mu'tazili, and then you are out of the whole game. This is another issue. Yeah. So I think these are the questions for today here, for the forum here. Professor Bargut, are you there online? Professor Bargut?
Professor Imtiaz, can I just share one experience regarding Islamization of knowledge?
Go ahead,
if there is time?
Go ahead.
Actually, I'm not a great fan of Islamization of knowledge and haven't seen it too much in practice, but I must admit that before joining the university for my master, I had absolutely not even a nebulous idea of Islamization of knowledge. But during the first semester of my master's, and then subsequently, I've been able to see the importance of Islamization of knowledge, at least in the ethicalization of knowledge. Prior to this, I had never even a concept that knowledge had to have an ethical basis. We were studying because we needed a degree. We needed a degree because we needed a career. But then the good thing that this university did to me, and I'm sure to a lot of other people, is to give us a perspective that was not available in other universities, at least the universities that I'm exposed to. So in that sense, even if the attempt may not have borne full fruit, at least it has sparked a feeling, it has sparked a thought, and has made people think on the need for what you will nowadays call integration of knowledge, and what I have understood it to be the ethicalization of knowledge. This is just for the records. And as far as Islamic economics is concerned, I think we have Professor Abdul Khaliq over there. He's the best man to respond to this. My only 2 cents on this is that this is very much in its infancy, should give it some time to grow and mature and prove itself. Thank you very much.
Please don't get me wrong. I am not saying that Islamization knowledge movement, the failure word I have not used. That is Dr. Imtiaz. But what I'm saying is that Islamization of knowledge movement has not achieved what it was designed to achieve. That is my position. I am myself is a product of this kind of movements. And therefore, I must appreciate. I mean, so Sayyid Maududi's contribution is huge in our lives. So we must not only appreciate, admire them. But that does not necessarily mean that I will agree with everything that Sayyid Maududi said. This is not my training. If someone feels that whatever Maududi has said, we have to achieve it first, and then we go for further seeking of knowledge. This is the position I have seen among many supporters of Sayyid Maududi. That is a wrong perception. It is not possible. Everything that we implement, what Sayyid Maududi said was 50 years ago, 70 years ago. Situations have changed. Under the new circumstances, you have to re-examine this situation and come up with new ideas. And I don't think that Sayyid Maududi would have disagreed with what I'm saying. Thank you.
Yeah, we need to revisit Maududi in a new way. And that's where, again, the problem comes up.
So we do that.
But Abdullah,
And someone is saying that we can't hear you. You didn't turn your microphone on. Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't remember what I said anyway, so I'm sorry. But what I mean, I think we need to reevaluate what are the Islamic issues, right? Everybody talks about the Sharia so much, the law, not other issues. There are many other issues. As I always talked about in the Islamic economics, people talk about the interest rate. Very few people talk about poverty. In fact, one person told me poverty is not our issue. He's doing Islamic economics. Poverty is not our issue. Our issue is how to make sure there is no interest in the calculation. So
No,
that is a total failure of
you
trying
call
to
it
understand.
markup, don't call it interest.
Yeah, I know they find legal instruments,
Yeah.
equally legal instruments to follow the
Anyway, I think
the
that is
convention.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
There's no more questions, so we come to an end for this forum. It's already time. Professor Bargut, are you there online? Professor Abdulaziz? I think he's not online, but inshallah, tomorrow morning we have a event here. So all of for you are invited, and Professor Bargut will be joining us tomorrow morning. He told me today that he's looking forward to meet Professor Abdul Hassan tomorrow morning, and you have agreed that you will also join us. So now we end with this program with giving a souvenir to Dr. Abdul Hassan. Professor Fauzi, please.
The same
one
as yesterday.
We have different. No, please. I'm a moderator.